We'd been talking to him for months now. Wait a second. They'd only been talking to me for weeks. So, they probably would have gone ahead. At 83, Harrison Ford doesn't mince words anymore. The gravel in his voice has suddenly grown deeper, rougher, the kind of sound that rumbles in your chest when he speaks. His grin, once the poster image of roguish charm, has shifted into something sharper, wry, self-aware, and dripping with the kind of honesty only a man who has lived a dozen lives on screen can carry. Ford has nothing left to prove, and because of that, he doesn't bother dodging questions the way most stars do. In a recent sit-down interview, the host, clearly riding a wave of boldness, leaned forward with aggron that dared to push boundaries. "Harrison," he asked, "all these years in Hollywood, working with legends, icons, beautiful women who defined an era, tell us the truth. Who were the ones that really got to you? The ones who left a mark so deep you still think about it?" The studio laughed nervously, half expecting Ford to wave it off with a grumble or a joke. But this wasn't a younger Harrison, sly and careful with his image. This was the older version, the man who had played Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Jack Ryan, and more. The man who'd lived through Hollywood's highs and scandals, who had seen it all. And this man didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, eyes glinting with that same spark audiences first fell for decades ago, and said almost too casually, "7. There are 7 women who could have had me." No questions asked. The room froze. The silence was thick, electric. Then Ford chuckled, low and dangerous. A laugh that belonged to a man who'd survived it all and still wasn't done. "Don't look so shocked," he growled playfully. "You don't spend 50 years in this town without a few sleepless nights wondering what might have happened if the cameras stopped rolling." The host blinked, thrown off by Ford's candor. 7 women? "Not 1, not 2, 7. The audience gasped, then broke into nervous laughter. The cameras zoomed in, catching that infamous crooked smile of us. Harrison wasn't bluffing. He wasn't teasing. He was serious. "See 7? The host pressed, voice quivering with equal parts excitement and disbelief. "Are you saying there were 7 women in Hollywood who Ford cut him off with a shrug, leaning back in his chair like he was settling into a story only he could tell? "What the hell?" he said, voice raw with amusement. "I'm 83 years old. Who's going to stop me now?" The audience erupted into applause, laughter, and cheers. That's the thing about Harrison Ford. He knows when to play coy and when to drop a truth bomb that sets the world on fire. He waited for the room to calm down, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You wanted honesty?" he said, his eyes narrowing with that same mischievous energy that made Han Solo wink across a cantina. "Then you're going to get it." These weren't just crushes. These were the women who haunted me, who walked into a room and turned me into somebody else. My co-stars, my almost lovers, my legends. The host leaned in closer, practically vibrating with anticipation. The crowd buzzed, every ear straining for the first name. Harrison tapped the table once like a drumbeat of suspense and said simply, "Let's start at the beginning." Before he dropped the first name, the narrator's voice cut in, smooth and calculated, drawing viewers deeper into the moment. "But before we dive into Harrison Ford's unforgettable 7, the voice teased, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell for more untold Hollywood secrets. Because, trust me, number 5 and number 7 on Ford's list are going to shock you. These are names nobody expected. And when he explained why, even the studio couldn't hide their reaction. The screen flickered with flashes of old movie posters, red carpet shots, and candid behind-the-scenes clips of Harrison with Hollywood's most iconic women. This isn't just gossip, the narrator continued. This is a confession, a once-in-a-lifetime moment where the most private rogue in Hollywood decided to share the secrets she's carried for half a century. And with that, the first name was revealed. The princess, the rebel, the spark in his galaxy far, far away. Harrison leaned back in his chair, grin softening at the memory. "Carrie Fisher," he said. God, she was trouble. Brilliant, wickedly funny, sharper than anyone else in the room, and of course, gorgeous. But it wasn't just that. She knew how to cut me down to size, and that made her irresistible. Fans had seen Han and Leia's chemistry explode on screen, but Ford confessed it wasn't acting half the time. Carrie had this way of looking at you like she'd already figured you out, like she knew every bad idea running through your head, and instead of stopping you, she dared you to go through with it. He chuckled, shaking his head. She could whisper something outrageous right before a take, then sit back smiling like the devil while it tried not to laugh. Carrie wasn't a woman you forget. She was the kind you always wanted one more night with. The warrior queen of sci-fi, the woman who fought monsters on screen and somehow made men in Hollywood weak at the knees. Harrison rubbed his chin, smile tugging at the corners. Sigourney Weaver, my God. When Alien hit theaters, Ford admitted he and every other actor in town suddenly found themselves captivated. She had that presence. Tall, poised, no nonsense. She didn't flirt like other actresses. She didn't have to. She could just walk into a room and you'd start tripping over yourself, trying to keep her attention. Ford confessed he envied her strength. I was Indiana Jones. I was Han Solo. Bigeros. But Sigourney, she had this cool authority. She made you believe she was the one who'd saved the day. And honestly, half of me wanted her to save me. The legend, the chameleon. Harrison shook his head slowly, almost reverently. Meryl Streep. What can I say? She made the impossible look easy, and that intelligence dangerous. Mariel wasn't the loud, fiery type. She didn't need to be. Harrison admitted that being around her on set was unnerving. She looked at you like she could see every crack in your armor, like she knew what you were hiding. And the worst part, she was usually right. What got him was her restraint. She had this quiet power. She didn't need to take the spotlight. She was the spotlight. I've been around hundreds of actresses, but Mariel, she made me feel like I was the one auditioning, the goddess of poise. Harrison leaned forward, lowering his voice. Helen Mirren. That woman could walk into a room and own it without saying a word. Ford described her as a mix of regality and rawness, something that unsettled him in the best way. She carried herself like a queen, but with this wicked twinkle in her eye. You never knew if she was about to lecture you or seduce you. He laughed, shaking his head. I'd watch her on stage or in films and think, God help the man who thinks he's in control around her. Because he's not. The shocker, the one that made the studio audience gasp. Harrison grinned when he said her name, Michelle Pfeiffer. Now there's trouble wrapped in elegance. Ford admitted that Pfeiffer's combination of vulnerability and strength made her impossible to resist. She had this softness, this gentleness, but then you'd catch her eyes, and suddenly you realized she could cut you down with a single glance. Fans weren't expecting Pfeiffer's name, but Ford didn't care. I'd be lying if I said she didn't cross my mind more than once. Hell, more than a few times. The firebrand, the activist, the woman who blended beauty with brains and a sharp tongue. Ford leaned back, smile curling. Jane scared the hell out of me. In a good way. Admired her boldness. She wasn't afraid of anyone, wasn't afraid of anything. She spoke her mind, lived her truth. And when a woman like that turns her attention on you, even for a second, you feel it. Believe me, the legend of Leggins, the name that made the audience erupt. Harrison sighed, voice dropping low. Elizabeth Taylor. What do you want me to say? She was a force of nature. By the time Ford crossed paths with her, Taylor was already an icon. But to him, she was more than that. She had this magnetism, pure, unfiltered. You couldn't look away. I've stood next to presidents, legends, you name it. But Elizabeth Taylor. She made me nervous. And that's saying something. Ford grinned, shaking his head like a man still a little haunted. If she had said the word just once, I'd have dropped everything. By the time Harrison had rattled off Michelle Pfeiffer at number 5, the audience was in shock. Nobody had expected that name. Not in a million years. The host leaned back, laughing, practically fanning himself from the heat Ford was dropping in the studio. And when Ford dropped Elizabeth Taylor as number 7, the room nearly lost it. People clapped, whistled, some even gasped. The legend had spoken, and he hadn't held back. This is scandalous, Harrison? The host teased, trying to keep control of the room. Ford just smirked. Scandalous? I'm 83. Scandal doesn't scare me anymore. As the interview wrapped, Ford's grin softened into something more reflective. You spent decades in this business, and people think they know you. They see the characters, the adventures, the lines. But the truth is it's the people, the women, the moments that stay with you. Not the premieres, not the awards. It's the connections. He leaned back, eyes far away as if revisiting old ghosts. Some women you never get over. You just learn to carry the memory. And maybe, if you're lucky, you laugh about it years later. The host nodded, the studio hanging on every word. And with that, Harrison Ford, Hollywood's eternal rogue, stood up, smirk still in place. 7, he muttered almost to himself. And every damn one of them knew it, faded to black. When the cameras stopped, rolling, the studio was buzzing like Abbey Hive. Crew members huddled in corners, whispering, laughing nervously as thought they had just witnessed a scandal unfold live. One assistant, still wide-eyed, muttered, Did he really just say Elizabeth Taylor? Another shook her head in disbelief, grinning. The host himself was still reeling, replaying Ford's words in his mind. Later, off-air, he admitted, I thought he was going to laugh it off, maybe name one Ortwo, but 7. And the way he said it, like he didn't care anymore. God, that was vintage Harrison. It wasn't the kind of moment you could script. It wasn't publicity. It wasn't PR Polish spin. It was raw, unfiltered Ford. The crew would talk about it for weeks afterward. Some swore they caught him smirking backstage, enjoying the chaos he had just unleashed. By the next morning, headlines were everywhere. Harrison Ford names 7 women who haunt him. Hollywood Rogue confesses the 7 who could have had Han Solo. News anchors replayed the clip. Pausing at every smirk, every raised eyebrow, social media exploded. Fans splicing old clips of Ford with Carrie Fisher, Sigourney Weaver, Michelle Pfeiffer. Memes spread like wildfire. One fan tweeted, So basically, Harrison Ford just confirmed what we all suspected. He was the biggest flirt in the galaxy. Another wrote, Number 5 broke me. Michelle Pfeiffer. My jaw is still on the floor. Entertainment blogs dove deep into the lore, analyzing each name, pulling up behind-the-scenes stories, quotes, and even old paparazzi photos. Did Ford drop hints decades ago? Was this his final curtain call of honesty? Harrison, of course, stayed silent. No clarifications, no follow-ups, just a grin when paparazzi shouted questions at him outside his house. That grin said it all. He knew exactly what he had done. As the confession circulated, something interesting happened. Hollywood insiders began comparing Ford's blunt honesty with the carefully curated, media-trained generation of younger actors. Today's stars, bound by contracts, social media image, an endless PR spin would never dare make such a confession. One columnist wrote, "Can you imagine Chris Evans, Timothée Chalamet, or even Ryan Gosling admitting something like this? Impossible. Their careers would implode overnight. But Harrison Ford, he's untouchable. He's earned the right, it highlighted a truth. The old guard of Hollywood played by different rules. Stars like Nicholson, Eastwood, and Ford belonged to an era where scandal wasn't carefully avoided. It was worn like a badge of honor. And here was Ford at 83, reminding the world that he still had more edge in him than most actors half his age. Far from damaging his reputation, Ford's confession seemed to etch him deeper into Hollywood legend. Fans called it the most Harrison Ford thing ever. Critics praised his refusal to sanitize his past. Some even argued it humanized him more than any role ever had. For decades, he'd been the archetype of the charming rogue. The man who played heroes, but carried a devilish twinkle in his eye. Now, in one candid moment, he proved that the rogue wasn't just a character. It was him. As some journalist put it, Ford didn't just give us a list. He gave us a glimpse into the man behind the myth. And that glimpse was every bit as irresistible as Han Solo's smirk or Indiana Jones's whip. Weeks later, when asked again about the infamous list, Ford leaned on the podium at a press junket, eyes narrowing as the room fell silent. 7, a reporter shouted. Do you stand by that number? Ford smirked, the same dangerous boyish grin that had carried him for over 50 years. 7, he repeated simply, and you can keep wondering who else I left out. The room exploded in laughter, but Ford was already walking off stage, hands in his pockets, grin fixed firmly in place. Because that's the thing about Harrison Ford. He never gives you everything, just enough to leave you chasing the mystery. And maybe that's why, even at 83, he still has the world in the palm of his hand. We'd been talking to him for months now. Wait a second. They'd only been talking to me for weeks. So, they probably would have gone ahead. At 83, Harrison Ford doesn't mince words anymore. The gravel in his voice has suddenly grown deeper, rougher, the kind of sound that rumbles in your chest when he speaks. His grin, once the poster image of roguish charm, has shifted into something sharper, wry, self-aware, and dripping with the kind of honesty only a man who has lived a dozen lives on screen can carry. Ford has nothing left to prove, and because of that, he doesn't bother dodging questions the way most stars do. In a recent sit-down interview, the host, clearly riding a wave of boldness, leaned forward with a grin that dared to push boundaries. Harrison, he asked, all these years in Hollywood, working with legends, icons, beautiful women who defined an era. Tell us the truth. Who were the ones that really got to you? The ones who left a mark so deep you still think about it? The studio laughed nervously, half expecting Ford to wave it off with a grumble or a joke. But this wasn't a younger Harrison, shy and careful with his image. This was the older version, the man who had played Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Jack Ryan, and more. The man who'd lived through Hollywood's highs and scandals, who had seen it all. And this man didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, eyes glinting with that same spark audiences first fell for decades ago, and said almost too casually, 7. There are 7 women who could have had me. No questions asked. The room froze. The silence was thick, electric. Then Ford chuckled, low and dangerous. A laugh that belonged to a man who'd survived it all and still wasn't done. Don't look so shocked, he growled playfully. You don't spend 50 years in this town without a few sleepless nights wondering what might have happened.